Welcome to Champion Life Center's YouTube channel. You are listening to the messages from our Guelph and Cambridge satellite. We hope you enjoy this message by Napoleon Lumasag. Please come and join us for our worship celebrations, happening every Sunday, 3:30 p.m. at 55 De Vere Drive, Guelph, Ontario. See you then.
Amen. I shared some of this this morning in Brampton, and oftentimes when we go to Brampton or other satellites, we're able to go back to things that we have preached in the past and just be able to preach it again. But this week, I was thinking I was going to be able to do that, but the Lord really just gave me a word, a fresh word for Champion Life. And so I was able to share it this morning. I'm not sure we're going to cover everything that I shared with them, but we'll try to see which ones will be applicable here to us. I wanted to share today on the power of having a testimony, on having a memorial. And I've just been meditating on the book of Joshua, because I felt like Champion Life Church as a whole is coming into a new season of building. It's been 25 years of labor, of laying down foundation, of just kind of hunkering down, and laying foundation is not always easy. It's not always fun. It's a lot of work, and a lot of it gets, it goes unseen. And for the past 25 years, I told the church in Brampton that I felt like that was a season that it has been, the laying down of foundation, but that we as a church is coming into a time of acceleration. It is coming to a time where the foundations have been laid, and it's building season. It's now time where things that used to take 10 years, all of a sudden we're going to see within 1 year, and just that's what I sense, that type of acceleration is going to be taking place. And as I was taking, because Happy was the editor of the magazine that has been put together, you're going to see it next week, and many other contributors and many different people came to collaborate to be able to come up with a 25th year anniversary magazine. As they were working on that, and this past Tuesday, I picked it up from one of the printers here in Cambridge, and I drove it down to Brampton. As I was doing that, we were piling box after box. I think there was like 22 or 25 boxes of magazines, and it was like over 2,000 copies and of magazines. And as I was just piling that, I just felt like the Lord spoke to me from the text of Joshua, where when they were crossing over the Jordan, God gave them the instruction to pick up 12 stones from within the river, exactly where the Ark of the Covenant stood, and the priests stood, and God instructed Joshua to take 12 men, to take stones, and carry it with them as a sign of his testimony. Let's go there, Joshua chapter 4. Verse 1 through 7. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you, and put them down at the place where you are to stay tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. There's a quote that I read. I apologize, I can't remember who it was that I got it from. It says, a basic component of life is a hope for the future that is based on the memories of the past. which help bring meaning to the present. A basic component of life is a hope for the future that is based on the memories of the past, which bring meaning to the present. And it's talking about how important memories are, how important testimonies are. And here we see God giving Joshua very specific instructions that each tribe was to have its own rock. It was to have its own testimony. It's not good enough to just have one rock for everybody else. We've got to have our own testimony. We've got to have our own history with God. We've got to have our own memorial where we're able to say, this is what God has done for me. Not to diminish or belittle what everybody else has gone through and everybody else's stories, but to bring all of our stories together where we begin to pile up all of these stories, all of these rocks coming together until we are able to take a step back and see, my God has done awesome things. You see, when you're just having your own one testimony, you can feed off of that for a little while, but when you begin to hear your brothers and your sisters' testimonies of how God came through, it builds up your faith that to a place where it is able to believe for things that are greater than just what your own testimony would have brought you. When we hear of what God did in Calgary, we have our own testimonies here. God has done great things here, and there's stories after stories that we can all share with one another. But when we hear of what God did with CLC Calgary, how they were able to purchase that building, and how everything just came together, favor after favor after favor, what was impossible all of a sudden became possible. Not only it became possible, but it became cheap. That's a God thing. Where they were not planning on, these things, but fully furnished everything. The offices and the equipment in the church in Calgary, when they bought the building, the offer was this: we want to buy the building not at your price, but at this price. And not only at this price, but we want everything that is in it now. So from the office tables to the office chairs to everything, it all came. I said, okay, go for it. It all came. And so it builds not only our faith for, when we hear stories like that, it builds our faith here to a level wherein we would not be able to reach if we didn't hear it. And so God gives instructions to Joshua to pick up the stones, because these stones will one day, not only for you, but for the generations coming after you. When your children come and they're going to ask you, what do these stones mean? What is this pile of stone? You are able to say, well, let me tell you about what God has done. And build up not only your faith, but also the faith of the generations after you. That's why it's so important for us to sit our kids down and go through some of the testimonies that we have been through. Go through what God has been through, what God has done in us, because it builds their faith for what God is able to do, not only in our lives, but in their lives. Because when they understand that God is not a decreasing God, but He's a God that goes from glory to glory, strength to strength, and faith to faith, they're able to look at the pile of stones of our lives and say, if God did it with him, if God did it with them back then, imagine what God can do in the future for me and my family. The pile of stones is not meant to be camped around like a monument. The pile of stones is there not so we can have something to protect and be so defensive about. It's something to look back to and propel us to the future. It is not a place to camp around like a monument where Peter said on the Mount of Transfiguration, oh, this is an awesome place. Let's build tabernacles here. Let's just stay here in the mountaintops. Let's build these little houses, one for you, and one for Elijah, and one for and God had to shut him up. See, our experiences with God is not something to camp around in. It's a place where we revisit, so that when we revisit, we remember. And when we remember, we are able to reimagine what He's going to do in the future. It's not just a place to reminisce, but a place to reimagine. Not just the past victories, but the future potential. Not only does our testimonies, not only does our memorial stones testify of the past victories of God, but it prophesies to the future defeat of the enemy. Come on, you got to get this. Our testimonies, our memorial stones, our stories not only testifies of the past victories of God, but it prophesies to the enemy, to the future defeat of the enemy. We think that our little that's why when we ask for testimonies, don't ever be shy. See, we're so myopic in our vision that we think, oh, it's just what God did for little old me. You don't realize that it is a battle cry of God. It becomes the weapon in your hand to bring down the enemy. The Israelites in the wilderness, a whole generation of them died off because of a bad testimony from 10 people out of 12. Moses sends out 12 spies. They see the land. They see it's flowing with milk and honey. It's just as God said it would. But they saw the enemy from their own perspective, and they began to compare themselves with what was waiting for them. And they go back and they give a bad report, and their bad report discouraged everybody else. So much so that a whole generation of them had to die off, because you cannot inherit the promised land without faith. Their bad testimony killed them all off. And God had to raise up people that had a different testimony. That's why when Joshua crossed over the Jordan, he didn't send the 10. He learned his lesson. Forget the 10, I'll just send 2. There's lesser chances of them messing this up. I don't have another 40 years in the wilderness. He sends 2. And this is what, you see, they said, there are giants in the land. Yes, God, it is what God said. It's flowing, it's all that. But there's enemies there, and there's giants there, and we are like grasshoppers in their sight. Well, they didn't know that their testimony and what God had done prophesies to the enemy of his future defeat. Joshua 2, verse 8 to 11, Rahab takes in the 2 spies. And the 2 spies are spying out the land, and Rahab protects them. And this is what they had to say. Before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up on the roof to talk with them. And this is what she said. I know the Lord has given you this land. She told them. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of heaven above and the earth below. Here are the spies, and they begin to see the giants. Oh, they're giants in the land. And we're just grasshoppers in their sight, not realizing that these giants have heard of the giant God of Israel, and they are all terrified because the testimony of Israel, the testimony of God, was prophesying to the giants of their future defeat. That's why you can't say, oh, it's just my testimony. I don't want to share my testimony. It's just a little bit. No, nothing. God doesn't do anything just a little bit. There is anything and everything God does is supernatural. Whether it's a toothache being gone, or whether it's somebody, your knight in shining armor finally comes to your life. Sometimes that's the greatest miracle of all. God doesn't do anything insignificant. The testimony, he says, build up, put these piles of stone together. Because not only are you going to, when you look at it, not only will you be built up and your faith will rise up and you're going to see what is possible with God, but the enemy will see the same stone and they're going to know they're going down. They're going to know that their fate has been sealed. They know that their defeat is near. What do these stones mean? It means that God is faithful and God is able, and He will see you through and He will make a way for you. I love the small details in Scripture where it says the riverbed dried up. Why just, it's one thing for the waters to roll back. And just a little bit of mud, I'm not going to complain. But God doesn't do anything halfway. If He says it's going to dry up, it's going to dry up. I mean, to you that may be insignificant, but to me, it's just, when God says so, it is so. When He said, let there be light, it wasn't just, these floodlights going on and again, brighter and brighter and brighter until full brightness. It was the Big Bang. What does it mean? What do these stones mean? It means God is faithful. And He tells them to carry the stones on their shoulders. Joshua 4:3 says, carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. Joshua 4:19-20, the people crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Then they camped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho. It was there at Gilgal that Joshua piled up 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. Notice God didn't say, soon as you cross the border and your feet touch dry ground, put the pile of rocks together. He says, no, you're going to have to carry this for a while. You're going to have to go a day's journey. They left early morning. They crossed the Jordan, and they had to walk and travel for a whole day until the place where they had to come to. The first stop they made was a place called Gilgal. And He says, there, build a memorial. You don't need a memorial when you just cross the Jordan and your feet landed on dry ground, because your adrenaline is still going, your joy is still going. But now you're going to need this memorial stones just when the strength of your flesh begins to weaken. When you get to the place where you can't go any further because darkness is set in all around you, you can't see where you're going, that's when you're going to need the memorial stone. That's when you're going to need the memorial stone, when the adrenaline has waned, when the toll of the long journey has come upon your body, when you can't go anymore in your own strength. That's when you need to pile up the stones, because that in your weakest moment, when you remember what God has done, His strength will be made perfect in your weakness. Go into the place. Don't just drop it anywhere. Go where your flesh can take you no more. And when your flesh can't take you no more, my Spirit will carry you through. Remember what I've done for you. In the darkness, never doubt in darkness what you heard in the light. It's there when the manna stops that you're going to need the memorial stones. No more freebies in the promised land. Everybody walked around the wilderness. Manna will come down every morning. You cross over to the promised land, mana ang mana. Mana. It's done. For the Bisaya, they'll get it. It's finished. It stops. Because now you're partnering with God, and sowing and reaping begins to take place. Toiling begins, not toiling as in a bad sense, but you're now responsible. You now become stewards. We think that the promised land is going to be flowing with milk and honey, and it's just going to come out of a spout whenever you want. Listen, the land flowing with milk and honey is the promised land, but you're going to have to do some work. Carry them and pile them up tonight when your strength can take you no more. First resting place, first campsite, when the adrenaline had waned and the long journey had taken its toll, there, build a memorial. There, when you see the walls of Jericho that seems impregnable, build a memorial. That's what David was saying. I see this giant, but I've killed the lion and the bear. And I'm going to do the same with this giant. What is he doing? He's going back to his memorabilia. He's going back to his place of testimony. He's going back to the place where he's piled up all these stones with testimony after testimony, which built his faith for what he was facing at that moment. Build a memorial when you realize the numerous battles you're going to have to fight to possess the promised land. It is there that you're going to need the memorial stones. Build it in Gilgal, because Gilgal is the place of circumcision. Oh, you're going to need the memorial then. Oh, without circumcision, you can't inherit the promise. Because it's a circumcision that is a mark of covenant. The possession, the promised land, is for those who are covenant keepers. It's not just for everybody. It's not just for anybody. You've got to come to a place where you're willing to cut covenant. And so they come into this place, and the first thing that God does is circumcise them. Because a whole generation had been raised up in the wilderness, and their fathers never circumcised them. And that generation died out, and this new generation raised up in the wilderness is now coming into the promised land, but they've not yet been circumcised. And God says to Joshua, now it's time for you to cut off some flesh. And he says in Joshua 5:2, verse 2-3, at that time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives. Notice it wasn't just one. They ought to be thankful it wasn't just one. Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gabath Haraloth. You know, in the New King James translation, it says a hill of foreskin. That's the translation of it. Look it up. That's why I use the NIV, because at least a little safer. Build a memorial when you're hurting. Remember, look to the memorial when you're bleeding. Look to the memorial when you are being chastised, when you are being sharpened, when God is dealing with you. In everywhere you turn, it seems like God is dealing with certain things. You can't run away from Him. Remember that our hope for the future is anchored on the memories of the past, which now brings meaning to the present. When we're being cut, when we're being dealt with, when God is shaping us, because those whom He loves, He chastises. Remember that there's a reason to it all. Remember that there's a memorial that's been set up to keep you going. And we're going to need the covenants that we're making with God. We're going to need this circumcision, because as I said before, circumcision is a mark of covenant, and covenant means what I have. When I come into covenant with you, what I have becomes yours, and what you have becomes mine. It's this idea of marriage where all that I have becomes all of yours, and all of yours becomes all of mine. That's why God says to Abram, I will bless those who will bless you, and I will curse those who will curse you. Why? Because your enemies become my enemies, and my enemies become your enemies. And whatever I have access to, you now have access to. And whatever your strengths are becomes my strength, and whatever my strengths are becomes your strength. And there's this covenant between us and God, and we're becoming one with God, where our enemies become His enemies, and His resources become our resources. We're going to need this covenant, because on the east of Jordan, Moses conquered 2 kings. But in the promised land, Joshua 12, 9-24 lists all the kings that Joshua had to conquer. We don't have time to read through them all. But king of Jericho, king of Ai, king of Jerusalem, king of Hebron, king of Jarmuth, king of Lachish, king of Eglon, Gezer, Debir, Gedor, Hormath, Arad, Libnah, Adullam, Makkedah, Bethel, Tapua, Hefer, Ephek, Lashron, Madon, Hazor. I'm sure I'm saying some of these names wrong, but it doesn't matter. They lost to Joshua. Shimron, Meron, Aksaph, Tanaka, Megiddo, Kadesh, Jokneam and Carmel, Goyim, Gilgal, Tirzah. By the time Joshua came to his old age, and he wasn't even done yet, he had to conquer 31 kings. Anybody want to cross over to the promised land now? But we fear not, because we know we bear the marks of a covenant. And He is a covenant-keeping God. That's why He says, stand, for the battle is the Lord's. if you're in covenant. If you've allowed yourself to go through the chastisements, if you've allowed yourself to go through the circumcisions that He brings into your life, the battle becomes the Lord's. 31 kings in all. And Joshua chapter 13 goes on to say, and there were still more kings and more land to be taken. So I wanted to talk to our young people. There comes a point in time that you're going to be inheriting some of the legacy that your parents, grandparents, you're walking in the favor that they have opened up for you with their righteous life. God blesses those up to 1,000th generation of those who love Him. But there will eventually come a point where you're going to have to cut your own covenant. There will eventually have to come a point where you're going to have your own histories with God, that you cannot ride on the coattails of your parents' faith and the stories of your grandparents, as great as they may be. You're going to have to come into a place of one-on-one, having covenant with God, laying down your life for the things of God. And only then will we know that we are in a safe place, because we now know that our enemies become His enemies, and His resources, what is available in heaven, becomes available to us. Lastly, for those that have already settled, there are some that have been walking with God so long, and you feel like, I've fought my battles. It's now time for the young ones. We don't have too many here. But for those that are thinking of retiring, I want to tell you, there is no such thing as retiring in the kingdom. There is a refiring. When Israel crossed the Jordan, there were 2.5 tribes that stayed behind. The Gadites, the Reubenites, and half tribe of Manasseh. They chose their lot. They chose that part of Jordan. They chose to stay on the east side. They didn't choose to cross over, because they were a people with large herds, and the place that they had been at was more suitable for their herds. And at first Moses was against it, but eventually he permitted it, and he gave that side of the Jordan as their inheritance. And they had come to a place where they were already settled. They had already received their inheritance. But Joshua calls them in Joshua 1, verse 12 to 18. He says, Joshua called together the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. He told them, remember what Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. The Lord your God is giving you a place of rest. He has given you this land. Your wives, children, and livestock may remain here in the land Moses assigned to you on the east side of the Jordan River. But your strong warriors, fully armed, must lead the tribes across the Jordan to help them conquer their territory. Stay with them until the Lord gives them rest, as He has given you rest, and until they too possess the land the Lord your God is giving them. Only then may you return and settle here on the east side of the Jordan River, in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, assigned to you. They answered Joshua, we will do whatever you command us, and we will go wherever you send us. We will obey just as we obeyed Moses. And may the Lord your God be with you as He was with Moses. Anyone in Israel rebels against your orders and does not obey your words, and everything you command will be put to death. So be strong and be courageous. It's been said at times that the greatest hindrance to the current move of God, or to the new move of God, are the people who have participated in the old move of God. The old move of God, the people have been through there. They begin to critique and judge what God is doing with a new generation, because it didn't look like the way they did it. It doesn't feel like the way they did it. The methodology is not fitting to how they used to do it. But my prayer is that we would be a church where the older generation would not look down on the younger generation and fold their arms and say, well, we've done our part, let's see what you can do. My prayer is that we would be a multi-generational church who understands the value that we bring so long as we're alive. Just because you are older does not mean you are finished. There is wisdom that lies in the old that the young will never receive unless it's been imparted to them. And I just want to encourage those that are older here with us to not take a step back and just watch everything else moving forward. We need the moms and we need the dads to run alongside of their children and say, let us go to war together. Let me impart to you what I have received in all my years of walking with God, all my victories in God, and all that God has done for me. Let me impart that to you. And we need the young people to come and say, we need that wisdom. We have the strength, we have the zeal, but we don't have the wisdom that they carry. We don't have the stories. We don't have the insight in some of the things that they've been through. We need them to lead us and to guide us and to receive from them so that our lives would be enriched in the same way that the older generation is not intimidated by the lack of energy they now have, because they understand their value in God and they're able to give everything that they have received in God to the young generation. Only then, when the hearts of the fathers are turned to the children and the hearts of the children are turned to the fathers, God says He will break the curse off a land. We need the older generation to pass on wisdom, to pass on experiences, to pass on, if anything, just the stories, just the testimonies, so that the young generation may be built up and strengthened by those stories. And I shared it this morning, I really felt like there's no more this idea of retiring and just, oh, we've done our part, oh, that's cute, let the young ones go for it, they have all this. No, but there is this re-enlisting back into the army of God. All those who are in their 50s, in their 60s and over, there's a re-enlisting that is taking place. We need your wisdom. We need the wisdom of those who have gone before us. And I pray that our response will be just like the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. He said, we will do whatever you command us, and we'll go wherever you send us. Joshua 4:12-13 says, the men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over ready for battle in front of the Israelites, as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. Cross over for battle. You see, the way I see it, we can go either two ways for the older ones. We can either go out in battle, go out on our shield, be carried home in our shield with sword in hand. Or you could go out in your rocking chair with a glass filled with Polydent cleaning your dentures. We get to choose. We get to choose how we're going to live the rest of our lives. We're either going to go out with a blaze of glory. We're either going to go out going all out for God, or we're going to spend the rest of whatever remaining days we have cleaning dentures. We need our young people to honor those who have gone before them. We're not going to get as far as we need to get without their wisdom. So today we want to pray. Where would you get? We want to pray for us. We want to pray that each one of us, that the old ones would catch the fire again. The moms and dads, the father generations, the grandfather generation, grandparent generation, that we would catch that fire again. That we would catch the spirit of Caleb, who said, I am just as strong today as I was 40 years ago. Give me my mountain. We're not done. We need the young. We need the youth to put aside youthful foolishness, thinking they need no one. This independent spirit needs to go. It is not kingdom. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He had always been the God of the generations. He's made it so that we're all interdependent with each other. I believe it was Paul that alluded to our Christian walk as that of a marathon, as that of a relay race. That those who have gone before us, even into heaven, cannot yet celebrate until the terminal generation has finished its course. That there is a great cloud of witnesses in heaven cheering us on, for they cannot receive the full inheritance until we have run our course. Two generations, hearts of the fathers to the children, the hearts of the children to the fathers. Father, today we just pray